Welcome everybody. Let me say first a few words about the overall structure of the whole lecture. So we're going to spend like 2 hours here together. I hope we can fit it in that, because that's like the 5th or 6th time I'm doing this presentation, and every time it took like 3 hours. Today, on special request of Vasov, we want to finish in 2. Okay. And still, I want to, of course, encourage you to intervene anytime you want. Okay. I'll be presenting visuals about the history of the Taksim Square, or also some alternative places of centrality historically. So I'll be scanning the 19th and 20th century. But this is not just a chronological presentation. Indeed, the main ideas behind that we also start thinking about the background of the recent project as well. Why does this actor today want to change the Taksim Square the way he wants to change it? And maybe we can also catch some clues about why such a thing like cutting of trees has, like an intervention into built environment, has triggered that kind of a reaction, social reaction. So that's, I think, the major question we all have and the background. So it is not a presentation deliberately on this. I also started thinking about that. So it's kind of so that part of it more or less a brainstorming. The Taksim project, as it's presented today, does comprise of several parts, or it is presented in different segments. The Tarlabaşı Urban Renewal, as they call it, project, which I would rather call a kind of bulldozer rebuild, a total redevelopment project of Tarlabaşı, which also has a component of social cleansing, is one part of the project. Another part is the square itself, which is supposedly being pedestrianized. Another segment is the Opera House, Atatürk Cultural Center. Another segment is the tunnel, which is kind of being taught as an integral part of the square, which is indeed the official project that has been decided upon at the City Council, with the contribution of CHP, Republicans that contributed to that. And of course, the most disputed part, the park, the redevelopment of the Gezi Park, the promenade. Gezi means just to walk around, to promenade, so I will always refer to the Gezi as, when I speak English, when I say the promenade, I will indeed mean the Gezi Park. Okay? And the not yet so well outspoken part, everybody has a background in mind, first the mosque. Whether there will be a mosque built at Taksim or not is another segment. The project has not been ever presented in that, in that manner as an overall project. It does exist, I'm quite sure, in the mind of Mr. Erdogan, the Prime Minister, as a total project, but it has been always presented as the singular parts. So these are so the Tarlabaşı project indeed has started like already some 4 years ago, and since 1.5 years the area is emptied. Most of you have been surely been visiting it. Like 9 blocks will be totally pulled down. It is a project to protect the area in ensemble, but it is indeed, it will result in pulling it down in ensemble and building fakes in ensemble. So that's how it's going to be realized. But the Taksim project per se, which comprises of the tunnel plus the redevelopment of the promenade, has started in a manner of a coup d'etat, 5th November. So the whole area has been enclosed. It was a kind of a overnight enclosure process with a very, say, yeah, it has just a coup d'etat character, I think. And so people were quite overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do, because since more than a year, the tunnel and the redevelopment of the park were in discussion, but no real plans were there, no timing, so which way it would be done. So there was no, let's say, transparent information flow in the public. So the way the project appeared was quite shocking, and it was people were quite upset. And the already ongoing process of collecting signatures was intensified, but it was very clear in a week that most people who were signing had a standpoint, well, why should I be against the construction of the tunnel? Isn't it part of the pedestrianization project? And so, but if I am supposed to sign against the cutting the trees, yes, I will do it. So that was the most popular type of reaction. So the Taksim platform and also the Taksim Solidarity Network decided very soon to withdraw, to concentrate the whole project in the redevelopment of the promenade issue. And from then on, the whole signature action accelerated, reached like 130,000 signatures very soon. And thanks to that, also the Board of Monuments has made a clear decision saying it should not be allowed to rebuild the barracks, which were demolished in 1940. It is not scientific, there's no necessity, and so on, with quite clear and understandable argumentation. They said so. But then Erdogan went on, and he took that decision to a higher bureaucratic board in Ankara. No academicians and no people from Istanbul were involved in that, just bureaucrats decided that this decision of the Board of Monuments should be cancelled. And then from then on, the tension grew, and as they began cutting the trees, not for the barracks, but to extend the space of the tunnel with some sidewalks. For that intervention, they went into the park and began cutting trees. So that whole process within the last 2 weeks, well, it has escalated to the point you're all aware of. Okay, to understand the whole background, so I'll just now a little bit try to overflow the historical background, starting from 19th century. So first of all, to understand the development, the spatial development of Istanbul in the 19th century. So in 19th century, Istanbul was a city of growth. The population grew like 5 times from 1820s till 1920s. And that meant a densification of the already built up areas, as well as colonization of new land. And that colonization of new land took place alongside 2 axes. The representation of the monarchy took place along the Bosphorus. So you know the Dolmabahce Palace and all the other coastal palaces were built up. Whereas the main road on the bridge, on the ridge, this is the mountain range that frames Bosphorus on the west side. That road on the ridge, which is we are on that road indeed here, Istiklal Street. Used to be called the Grand Rue in 19th century. It was in the Grand Rue de Pera, and further beyond Taksim it was called Grand Rue de Pancaldi, Grand Rue de Shishli, so it just went on this way. Indeed, almost where today Shishli Mosque and the Armenian cemetery behind were, it was kind of a city border in 19th century. This city grew alongside that axis that way, and on the coastal axis, all the way from Tophane till Ortaköy, the coastal palaces have also marked the development of the city on the waterfront. So Ortaköy was kind of included to the city core area of the city, we may say. already in the 19th century. So these two axes developed. And along this axis, so the coastal axis, this is just the beginning at Tophane, where some military infrastructure used to be. So the new places of representation all were developed alongside that axis, and also a whole set of new public spaces emerged, linked with the new palaces. This is, for instance, the square in front of the Yıldız Palace. Yıldız Palace is more like a campus, a compound within a large park, which doesn't have a big compact shape in the last part of the 19th century, but still at the interface of that palace compound with the city, in Upper Beşiktaş, which is the area of the Barbaros Boulevard today. So that's where we see here doesn't exist as such today, because the Barbaros Boulevard is just rolls over it. It has destroyed this square you see. But you see a new type of public space emerged, with a new type of imperial mosque and a clock tower being, say, major elements of it. So you see at a Friday noontime prayer, so all the higher bureaucracy would just get there to a network. It's just a place to show off, not necessarily anymore with the very original, say, meaning of the religion, that different social classes get together at a Friday noon prayer. But it is rather a well, a show off of the elites, particularly political elites and bureaucratic elites, type of thing. And you see the space is quite overwhelmingly, say, dominated by these coaches. If we just look at a contemporary picture of the transformation of the city in the 19th century, you see here that the historical city, the ancient Ottoman city, of which you can see here traces in the yellow part. Yellow on this particular map means wood as a structure, as a construction structure. So this is kind of a pedestrian city. So the old Ottoman city was a city for pedestrians. The mahalles were places of all social classes. You see here a big konak, a villa of an upper class, but also more moderate and modest households share the same space with it. But altogether, there's not much public space. And whenever such a neighborhood would be demolished by fire, the new regulations for buildings and roads would be implemented. So these regulations were released from 1840s onwards throughout the entire 19th century in many waves. And you see a kind of a coach-compatible or a horse-compatible transformation of the urban space in Istanbul takes place, because the former city was only for pedestrians. You would always walk down to a pier, and from the piers you would take a boat to get to another neighborhood, and again would continue walking there. So now we have a situation that's the one who owns a chariot may kind of be mobile in the city in a different way we have been not used to prior to mid-19th century. Okay? So, of course, the chariot, the ownership of that is just like car ownership today is an upper-class issue. For the others, they were the horse-pulled trams. But it's a very major thing, so that the city just gets through this transformation also as its borders extend, and many roads, in particular on the hinterland, not necessarily directly attached to the seafront. Such neighborhoods are being enclosed, put in as part of the city. It's important that you have these new means of mobility. And of course, one more thing that goes along with it, the stables become major landmarks in the city, because now tens of thousands of horses are introduced into the city, which didn't live in the city until that time. And so stables become kind of a major element of the new construction program in the city. So they do really occupy major important public spaces. They are very often built also as buildings of representation, of monarchic representation. The Sultan houses so many horses for the elites, but also for the public transportation is also an important element So therefore, this picture has to be understood within the background of a city I've just shown. Of course, also used these places for military parades. The major, let's say, the main square that emerges in the 19th century is at that time the square attached to the Dolmabahce Palace. Taksim is that at that point not yet a square, and it is just a road junction. We will see it in a few minutes. And there is a big cemetery. You see the trees. Part of the cemetery is already cut, and the German embassy has emerged. So the German embassy is built, is indeed the first development on that green space is indeed the German cemetery. So seeing today many friends from Germany being present here solidarily to fight against the cutting the trees of the Taksim promenades is indeed that happened in 1890s. So today, 130 years later, or 120 years later, today seems to be also a different consciousness there. But in those years, a big German community lived here, and so they didn't find it anyhow disturbing to get granted that green space to build the house. Of course, in those years, entire Istanbul has been developed on top cemeteries. So let me just show you a picture. I mean, almost the entire area, starting from the city walls of Galata, not this part, the road on the ridge here was going through some vineyards and gardens, but just all the slopes down to Tarlabaşı, to Kasımpaşa, that area, and further up to Taksim, that was all huge cemetery belt. The city in the 19th century altogether was developed on Muslim, Greek, Armenian, Catholic, etc., and so on, or Jewish, without difference in confession. It was kind of business as usual to develop the city on that green space. So the only cemeteries that are left over are the cemeteries in Şişli, in Osman Bey. There's this the Protestant and the Armenian cemeteries there, and the Armenian cemetery in Mecidiyeköy are the only ones that has been saved so far till today. But most of the city in 19th and 20th century was built on cemetery grounds, so it's quite a usual thing. So the square attached to the Dolmabahce Palace, we do not today perceive it as a square. It is because it has been demolished in the 1930s. Today it is just circulation surface for cars, and it is parking space for tourist buses. So we don't really conceive that square today. But so you can see it here. So here we have the mosque from the sea. This building I'm just showing you now here, it is the theater of the Dolmabahce Palace. And here we have the stables of the Dolmabahce Palace. The palace itself is now further to the right hand side. We don't see it here. And indeed, the Dolmabahce Palace, that's very important, was a major urban ensemble. The Ottomans would call such a thing a külliye. You just think of the külliyes of the classical külliyes of the Ottoman civilization were built in the 16th, 17th centuries. Just think of Süleymaniye, Fatih, and so on. So these would comprise of the mosque, and were built around the courtyard of the mosque, and would comprise of schools, kitchen for the poor, caravansarais, bathhouses, shopping areas, libraries, and this and that. So any type of public building program that was necessitated in a neighborhood was built around that mosque courtyard, which was the center of the whole ensemble. So in 19th century, I guess the necessity had changed. So the understanding what kind of a construction program would be there has changed. So 19th century modernizing states, not only the Ottomans, any states in Europe at that time would be building like hospitals, schools, again, post and telegram offices are very important. Barracks for the military become important. Railroad stations become important. So this is kind of the new building program. And in case of Dolmabahce, So we have also the urban ensemble. It starts here, this building here is the boathouse, and with a small harbor attached to it, then the mosque itself, the theater, the stables here. Just on the back, there's a factory. This is the gas factory. So it is indeed also delivering the city gas to all these neighborhoods surrounding the palace. It's important, and also in the northern part of the city, in these newly colonized parts of the city, we would also see the introduction of the first municipal services, collecting of garbages, heating and lighting with the city gas, tap water, and so on. So these kinds of services are being introduced from 1860s onwards quite rapidly in these northern parts of the city. So the new colonization indeed means also a very civilizatory type of a mission. So the Sultan's residence is not just his house. It's just not just to show off that he can afford living in such a nice place, but it indeed, with all its urban ensembles, so to the square you have also to add this alley, the alley with the trees, where last week there were very heavy fightings between Beşiktaş and Dolmabahçe. That alley also as an urban entity. And also on the other hand, on the northern end of the palace, you know this akaretler development, so these houses in the row, the V-shaped developments as a housing, development for, again, the bureaucratic elites of the monarchy. And of course, last but not least, the whole, circle of the barracks, which do surround the whole valley. So which also kind of brings up the idea of the new military power, military being a major force of modernizing the country already from 1820s onwards. So all of that in ensemble is indeed a project of modernization. That's very important. So that's and this new project of modernization takes place in the north, in this new space, in the new urban space, and as you may know or not, so 1826, the new model army that was trained here in these northern districts would make a big overall attack towards the south, towards the historical peninsula, and would literally demolish, destroy, liquidate the ancien regime. It would liquidate the staff of the regime, the Yeniçeri Corps, and the bureaucrats and archives and all institutions, most important for us, of that ancien regime is demolished. And indeed, the Ottoman Empire is kind of restarted as a new modern empire that tries to catch up with other modernizing empires in Europe. Of course, particularly France, Prussia, and Austria-Hungary are the main models with which also a very severe exchange takes place. And I think all these monarchies do share a particular idea, which in political science is called the enlightened despotism. So, so in this sense, I think the Ottoman monarchs of the 19th century would well rank with that fashion. And of course, the other states just mentioned, these tendencies started already in the 18th century. The Ottomans kind of caught up with that a century later, more or less. But if you see what was happening in the 1860s, 70s in Istanbul's urban space, it is not necessarily much different than what was happening in Vienna, in Austria, except maybe like Ringstrasse, the peripheric road was built, so the boulevard system was not as explicit, except that main road on the ridge, which may also be seen a particularity of Istanbul. But just to sum up, we have here this the whole paradigm of the enlightened despotism and its modernizing mission, and very important, making this whole mission being well visible in a whole set of, let's say, buildings organized as an ensemble around a square. That's the major idea. And so here we see how that square is used. Also here with some police cars. I think the process that starts in 1930s here with the demolition of the Palace Theatre first, and later making the roads much larger and demolishing other annexes of the mosque, and later on the stables. I mean, just think of Vienna, for instance. The stables just opposite the palace had become the museum's quarter of that city, for instance. So it could have been preserved and could have taken similar, let's say, functions here as well, but it did not happen this way, because in 1930s, Istanbul, and in particular this space in Istanbul, would become kind of the playground of a new wave of modernizing concepts. The Republican concept of modernizing space has partly overlapped with that and demolished it. I'll get to that. This is the plan made by Henri Prost, the French planner of Istanbul, who was appointed the chef planner in 1936. But before I get to Henri Prost's planning process, I'd like to highlight a little bit the situation at the heights of Taksim before it has become a square. Let's see how the situation there was. So this is the not yet square Taksim Hill. This is a map around 1900. This is called the so-called German blues. This map does show us rather the situation of public space. So what you see in grayish blue is the paved roads, and the like this brown red are the still earth roads, which you see. Just to make an orientation, this is the later Taksim Square. This is today's Gezi Park, the promenade, yet barracks. This is the very first park in Istanbul, the Taksim Gardens. The very first public gardens of Istanbul is indeed here. This is the back part, where also the trees that were cut here. This is the Divan Hotel's former space. This is a whole Armenian cemetery. By the way, already in early 19th century, that part of the Armenian cemetery was obviously developed in order to develop the barracks on it. This was a Muslim cemetery. That Muslim cemetery was developed slightly later, around 1910s. So this part of the cemetery remained until 1910s, and that was developed. So this is the German embassy here. The Gümüşsuyu cemetery is here. So that was developed like 100 years earlier than that part. Here we have a huge grounds that is attached to the barracks, which is the exercise grounds, literally in Turkish, talim hane, the grounds to exercise. Some other military infrastructure which doesn't exist anymore. Water infrastructure here, some cistern, and big stables that are also attached, which are annexes of the stable. As you see, of the barracks, you see the main front, the major front of the barracks is indeed towards the exercise grounds, but between the exercise grounds and the barracks, we have now here a very Parisian style boulevard, which is today the Boulevard de la République, the Cumhuriyet Caddesi. So it is, and Taksim Square, there's no square yet, it's just at the junction of the Sıra Serviler and the Grand Rue de Pera, the Istiklal Street today, we have kind of a slightly, well, extended road. Not really a square, but kind of a, well, not yet a real square, but kind of an opening, less an urban void, let's say, is here. This is the Pera Quarter. Pera Quarter used to be until 1830s very much like the Cihangir Quarter here, very similar. It was a pedestrian area. Cihangir is on this picture at around 1900, still a pedestrian area. There are no roads for coaches. You see lots of cul-de-sac. This is still that ancient Ottoman city structure which you see here. But in the Pera part, on the other side of the Sıra Serviler, you see the roads have been extended just to accommodate the coach. But there's no real modernization that takes place here. Okay? It is mainly a speculation-driven development that we see here. So the planning office of the municipality of the 6th department, so you know Istanbul was new organized with new district departments, And the para area was called the 6e arrondissement, just again taking Paris as an example, as the 6th district. And
but there was no one.
Huh? There was no one. No, that's the interesting. The 6th was indeed the first. So they first built the 6th one, just in order to make it very clear, Paris is the model. But the same happened in Vienna too. The 6th Bezirk in Vienna is the same, was the exemplary. Madrid, Moscow, other cities also took the idea, making the 6th district the very exemplary one. But it was indeed the first district where all these modern municipal services was introduced. But interestingly, in that modern municipal system, the planner had no capacity to superimpose any geometrical plan. Indeed, they had such plans, but even after the big fire of 1871, they were not able to implement it. So they had prepared some plans to make like a road system, squares, piazzas, and so on, to make it nicer. But immediately after the fire of 1871, all landlords just came next day with their rods and they just claimed the land. And so it was quite speculation-driven process here. But if you go to Tarlabaşı, on the other hand, so this is the Tarlabaşı area, which is a newly developed area. This is a quite strong slope. So this is between the Dolapdere Road and the Grand Rue. There's almost 100 meters altitude difference. So this is quite a steep slope. I guess many of you do live in the Tarlabaşı area, so you know it. But so this is an area already for the poor, okay? Because the main road on the ridge was also kind of a road of segregation. So if you went down to the Golden Horn side, to Dolapdere side, so with every meter lower above sea level, you would also go down in social rank. You also see the infrastructure is, if you get down to the valley, is lower. But still, there is, you can see the impact of the planning hand of the municipal authority is here very clearly visible in the Pura district. Okay? But here where this whole development of the city is taking place with the major investors, you don't see the planning hand. So this, who does live here? It is mainly a very, say, cosmopolitan society. Today we would call them expats. They were mainly adventurous, small-scale investors who came all the way from London, Paris, Amsterdam, and wherever else, and who were just, kind of, after 1839 free trade agreement with Britain, Istanbul had become kind of a very attractive free port in the 19th century. It was a very globalized type of mood, much more, let's say, so than Istanbul today is, I would say. So that international mixed-up cosmopolitan community mainly lived here in the Pera area. Okay, so that's a picture of the Grand Rue. On the other hand, the northern parts, maybe we can see it here. So the areas surrounding the Machka Valley are also newly developed areas, but you see here, so these are developed in a manner, let's say like Kreuzberg in Berlin, or just think of the Eixample of Barcelona. So all these planned new development areas. Okay? So these were mainly areas development from 1830s, 40s onwards, and originally these were all areas which were used as exercise grounds for the military. So that these barracks were all placed around the valley. We have here the Gümüşsuyu barracks, 2 barracks here. We have here the Taksim barracks, which don't exist anymore. The Harbiye barracks. We have here the Machka barracks. The last one here is just attached to the palace itself. So 7 barracks altogether. So these areas were indeed the training grounds of the military between 1790s and 1830s. But after they have completed their mission, and the mission was indeed demolishing the old regime, the ancien regime of the Ottoman Empire, so there was not anymore a big necessity to use these grounds in military terms. So this was now the reserve areas for the city to develop, and that development was unlike the Pera development. So development of here, of Tatavla, today's Kurtuluş, Osman Bey, Şişli here, Şişli, I mean, it's not very well visible, it just continues this way, and here Nişantaşı, Machka areas, was quite a planned issue. you will see the main road that takes us to the north. This is now the Elmada zone today. It was called the Grand Rue de Pancaldi at that time. This is one of the barracks, the Harbiye barracks. Another picture of it at the corner of the Divan. Indeed, just outside the road, today where we have the radio house and the Hilton Hotel, the area was still one of the last cemeteries, the Armenian cemetery there. Okay. This is a picture now from a balloon. The theater already is demolished, doesn't exist anymore. The stables are still there, the royal stables. İstabli amire, they would say. They would not use anymore the term ahır in Turkish. Ahır is quite very pejorative. So they have, again, kind of imported that French word. They just put the I into it. İstabli amire. So it was the royal stables, the new thing. Okay. So, so Taksim itself is like that. This is a picture just very early 19th century, a plan. So the big exercise grounds, the barracks, and the established amire on Taksim hills here, again attached to it. So today, this is the square, the Atatürk Cultural Center is here, and this is the well disputed Gezi area. This would become very soon the very first gardens of Istanbul, this area, Jardin du Taksim, it will be called very soon. The barracks itself has been indeed redesigned here. You see the style is in this very fantastic Orientalist architecture. So it was Russian, Indian, whoever, who knows what. Maybe at that point we can enter already one of the first ideas. We can get a little bit into the recent project, because the government, particularly Mr. Erdogan, seems to be quite possessed with the idea of creating something Orientalist. Some Orientalist architecture must be well, dominating visual impact on the Taksim Square. That is more or less, it seems to be the major obsession. But indeed, if you just think a little back, how did the Orientalist architecture enter Istanbul's urban space? Indeed, those who introduced the urban, the Orientalist architecture to Istanbul are no other people lesser than the Western travelers per se, because when they visited Istanbul, they found it kind of, well, first of all, of course, not representative enough, and as soon, so regarding its whole building stock, because it was built in wood, in very, very transitory type of, let's say, housing stock. So no permanent housing in stone, like you would find in Central Europe or Italy or elsewhere. So the house was, as it was not built on a piece of private property, but on a leasehold, which you would get from a holy foundation. So a house was usually regarded as something built for one generation. So next generation would just build its own house. So the housing was not representative at all. So the Western traveler was quite disappointed with the, let's say, maybe you would find it romantic, but it was not at all representative. And if you look at the representative architecture, well, you would find the Ottoman classicism, but it is again, well, quite reduced. It's a Renaissance architecture. It is not, it's not ornate at all. But if you come to the Orient, you obviously expected, if you came in 18th century to Istanbul, you would expect something, I don't know, something like from the fairy tales of the 1001 Nights, from Aladdin's lamp or whatever. So these big onion-shaped domes and stalactites and arabesques and all these, you know, fancy flowery ornamentation decorations. So you would not find them. So obviously it was the Western architect who would introduce it to Istanbul. So the Orient was introduced as a Western invention. So if, let's say, Maghrebi architecture arrived in Istanbul not because Ottoman architects went themselves to North Africa and studied there and wanted to build Algerian style or Tunisian or Moroccan style, no, because it was just kind of an impact of France. Or Indian architecture did not directly arrive here via Calcutta or Delhi. No, it was via London. So when Istanbul is built, say, those styles, they were indeed not imitating any Oriental geographies and cultures. No, they were indeed trying to become more Western, because these were fashions in the West. And so those fashions were reflected to the Ottoman Empire to make it look more Orient, because the Ottoman Empire was codified as the Orient. So as the West has constructed itself in polarity to the Orient, so it also had to create the first, if you would travel to the East, it was the first place on earth of the Orient was the Ottoman Empire. So you should construct it as the Orient, according to your image of the Orient. Otherwise, you being the Occident would not be justified. So this was kind of this seems to be a consensus. So the Ottoman elite obviously liked the idea and appropriated this idea. And therefore, this imported architecture would very soon have become very fashionable here too. So the AKP today has a particular cultural policy. I think so. It's the glorifying of the Ottoman past, not well taught in a way. It is very pejorative, and it's quite of a very bulk type of thinking about the Ottoman Empire altogether. Particularly, I would say, well overseeing the big rupture within the Ottoman culture and state and society, early 19th century, is, I think, within this whole paradigm quite well overseen. But interestingly, the cultural and architectural references, if you make such references to the Ottoman Empire, they are usually made to that modernizing period of the Ottoman Empire in 19th century. It's almost like a reflex. It is not so well taught, I guess, but this can be well understood because the AKP has taken up the very same idea of a traditionalist modernization, and that's exactly what many analysts of the Ottoman Empire of the 19th century would also say. They would also call it as a traditionalist modernization. So therefore, the images that the Ottoman Empire created in the 19th century have become quite popular. So this whole postmodern architecture of the AKP government today does take its references mainly in the 19th century Ottoman period. Although they glorify the Ottoman period altogether, but let's say the minimalism, the classicism of the 16th century, of a Sinan, is not at all an idea that's appreciated. If they build mosques, they do make very bad concrete replicas of Sinan mosques, but even they do not look, I mean, as fine as a real Sinan mosque is. So it is, but Sinan mosque was not just the mosque; it was a whole, let's say, understanding of, let's say, of architecture, which was in quite a minimalist approach to a very functionalist approach to architecture for its time. So these say such an analysis of Ottoman architecture is totally absent in my view, and so the references are directly to the Orientalisms of the 19th century. And I think Taksim Square has also changed in the last 20 years. Very radically changed. So of course you do not, as you're all kind of new visitors of the city, but like 20 years ago, all of Para was very similar to an area, for instance, I don't know if you have been there, to Gedik Pasha on the historical peninsula, where shoes and leather bags are produced. So Beyoğlu was an area like that. So on all upper floors of the, I guess also of this building, you would have such sweatshops So workers would live there and would produce shoes and leather bags. So it was a leather manufacturing city, and ground floor was a red light district. So it was not a posh area. After 1950s, it's degraded. It used to be a posh bourgeois area, but it has lost its quality, particularly after mid-60s, 70s, 80s. It had become kind of a big production city. So far, Taksim was not visited at all by tourists. So tourists were confined to the historical peninsula, to the Sultanahmet area only. But after 1990s, that has changed slowly, and in the last 5 years, very say accelerated change took place, particularly with big corporate art institutions moving into this area. That has changed quite strongly. And today, Taksim is also a touristic area. So I can imagine that now in AKP's understanding. So, well, if you look at Taksim, so what you see there, I mean, you see just the park, you see 1930s development area, Talimhane, so which just quite modernist architecture. You see the Marmara Hotel, 1970s, very functionalist hotel building, and the Opera House, the Atatürk Cultural Center, with this very typical postmodern facade, which could be in any German city. So, so Taksim doesn't resemble any particular place that you would attach to Taksim. I think this is this must be a very, very moving mental element. So, because indeed the very original discussions were in early 21st century, like 6-7 years ago, we were trying to prevent the demolition of the Atatürk Cultural Center and redevelopment of the site with something like this. So Erdogan's first plan was indeed redeveloping the Atatürk Cultural Center with something like this. We never saw any plan, but he just told it in words so we would understand. He wished a nice opera and not such a cold thing as we see there. Okay, so this there's a very strong, let's say, aversion against such any manifestation of modernity in architecture. So kind of, indeed, this attempt is not different. That's very important. So if we understand now, Taksim is a touristic place, which is being made as a fake, like a Disneyland. It is exactly the same attitude in 1880s when the German architect Mr. Jasmund built the railroad station at Sirkeci, which is an Orientalist piece of architecture. So indeed, so we would travel all the way from Paris, from Copenhagen, from Munich or Vienna, or from anywhere else in Europe. You would arrive at Constantinople at Gare de Sirkeci, and whenever you leave the train, you see this Orientalist building. So this is the proof that you now arrive in the Orient. They will take you with the coaches to the official hotel of the Wagonli company, which is just next door here, just behind us, and the Pera Palace Hotel. You just enter the main hall with this very Maghrebian architecture, which is called today the Agatha Christie Hall. So again, you're again convinced I am in the Orient. Okay? So it is the very, very same attitude, the very same 19th century attitude of creating the facade for the tourist. This is, first of all, the whole aesthetic, let's say, part of the whole project. Okay. Of course, the Taksim project is not to be reduced to that, but this is one of the constituting elements. I think it's important. Okay. So this is how the barracks square was used as the military exercise grounds. Talimhane. This is today the neighborhood of Talimhane, as they began developing in late 20s, early 30s. They began developing it. The barracks itself was demilitarized after the Young Turk Revolution, early 20th century, and had a function you may call, it was a multi-purpose city hall. In enclosed parts of it, you would have different functions. You would have commercial functions, like trade fairs would be there. You would have political parties holding their conventions. Also, clubs and associations use it as a conventions area, as a convention center. cultural programs were there, and also its courtyard was used both for sports and cultural events. So it was kind of a multi-purpose city club, let's say, the function of that building. Okay. So what was occurring around Taksim? Let's get a little bit about that. So this is now that void I was mentioning, a little bit zoomed here. This is not the Kışla. This is the Kışla is above it. Kışla means the barracks. This is the stables of the Kışla. Okay, and a photo, exactly the square we have seen here on a photo. And again here in the photo. So this, the blue mark shows us the exact location where very soon, in 1928, the monument to the Republic would be placed. So this is an ad hoc decision to place it there, but we have to understand why it was placed there. I just mentioned the Pera district was that cosmopolitan space, and the new Republican government has taken measurements to kind of kick out this big expat community, which is kind of 1/3 minimum of the total population in Istanbul. So they were kind of so between 1922 and 25, within the 3 years, Istanbul was almost emptied, you would say. So almost all expats left the city. Also many Ottoman citizens who were of Western European origin, so-called Levantines, have mostly left the city. The Turkish bureaucratic elites left the city. They went to Ankara, so the city's population went down from 1.5 million to less than 700,000 within 3 years. The city really was evacuated in a very, very short period. Okay. And then, in 1928, the newly established republic would put its monument, so on which you will see the on one facade Mustafa Kemal and his companions. This is on the north side as warriors, and on the southern side, looking towards Pera, as diplomats and statesmen. So that was placed just at the exit of the Pera neighborhood. So if you just come out of the Pera, so this Taksim void was like a funnel, and you would just have it there, well, kind of a first stop, and be aware, now we live in a new era, the Republic has arrived, the nation state is there. That was, I think, very important to place it just at the exit of that Pera town. Was, I think, well, if you just put your ideological impressions on space, I think there would have been no other space more convenient than that. But to place it there, they had to demolish part of these stables. You see, the stables are cut. You can see it here. Okay, the monument is put here. So they would cut the stables at one corner, you know, to create the space for the new monument, which is now built into a rotunda. Okay, like this. And meanwhile, you see the Talimhane, the exercise grounds area, is being developed as well. Now just go through. So it's again, it's a bit earlier. Talimhane just begins. Indeed, into that rounded up corner of the stables, they would call this, they would make a very modern facade. In early 30s, the famous Kristal Gazinosu, maybe the very famous Istanbul invention of the ıslak hamburger, which was invented in the Kristal buffet. It is before the American hamburger with McDonald's arrived in Islam like 20 years ago. Islam had this very famous invention of this, the wet hamburger in this very juicy tomato sauce, very oily, juicy thing. The bread has to be this spongy and wet thing. It has been created by this Kristal buffet. The Kristal buffet is indeed, well, it was created after the Kristal Gazinosu here was demolished. There's also very interesting. I'm not sure if they made the wet hamburger in Kristal Gazinosu. it was already invented there. I rather guess the hamburger was invention of the later period. Do you have an idea?
No, but it was on the time minus side.
Yeah, the original, yeah, Crystal Buffet, exactly. So this was the Crystal Gazino's on the square side. And so when this was demolished, the first Crystal Buffet was here on Talimhane site. Yeah, exactly. And then their major product was this, that wet hamburger. Okay, yeah, again, here's the Crystal Gazino. So this is now the situation which Henri Prost finds, let's say, as a setup when he arrives 1936. It's a late arrival. He should be arriving in Istanbul at least 10 years earlier. Atatürk wanted him to come to Istanbul and be present and start with this project. But he was quite busy. He was very busy in Paris, planning and teaching. He was the dean of the planning faculty. At the same time, he was planning in a dozen of cities in North Africa. And that's possibly together with the fact that Henri Prost was, as a student, he was a very, very brilliant student, and he had visited before the First World War already Istanbul, and he measured up. He's one of the first, say, persons who measured up Hagia Sophia and other monuments and so on. He made lots of studies on Istanbul architecture already as a young student. So he was quite knowledgeable about the city. Is one point that makes him interesting for Istanbul. Indeed, there was another rival who also wanted to come to Istanbul to take up this very same job, who also had spent time here in Istanbul. No lesser one than Le Corbusier, personally, but he was not preferred. I think the major decision for Henri Prost was due to a particular type of planning practice he had done. And that was, he was active in North Africa within the French colonial setup, which means, so the French had occupied North African cities, Algeria, Tunis, and within that setup, they had erected their military governance. And they were modernizing the Arab cities there. They would usually, there were two types of interventions. One type of intervention was building a new town. The second type of intervention was partly modernizing the old kasbahs, the old cities. But that type of intervention was sometimes not at all there, sometimes very moderate, in some cases radically. So, but in general, they preferred building up the new town in, outside the old Kasbah. But be it this or the other type of policy, so Henri Prost had a long, say, tradition of working practice only responsible to the military governor of the city, and no need to justify this whole planning process in a, let's say, democratic manner, as we pay. So participatory planning or things like that were not at all an issue. So the head of the whole colonial governance was his chef. So that set up, in particularly this modernizing, so the town planning as a modernizing mission within the context of a city with a Muslim background. That makes him very important, I think, in the eyes of the Kemalist elites. That's why he was invited. But he was busy doing this and that, so he could not arrive earlier, only as late as 1936. And meanwhile, indeed, lots of developments had taken place around Taksim, so the Talimhane area was already developed. If he had arrived already in the late 1920s, when this monument was erected, maybe the whole situation at Taksim would have been a different one. Possibly, I guess so. Maybe the barracks demolition would have not been a decision. Maybe we would have a green Talimhane area going around it, and so on. Might have also been another scenario if he had arrived here when the monument was erected. Because when 1928, when the monument was erected, you can clearly see at these pictures, see, that Talimhane is still a big void. Okay. Okay. So one thing important about 1930s Istanbul is, in particular, the inner parts of the historical peninsula. The Fatih district was quite abundant, not well inhabited city. Okay. This is a plan of the big area which used to be the Taksim cemetery that was developed already in late 1910s. So this is the part which would become later the Atatürk Cultural Center, the Gümüşsuyu Street here. Okay, the Mete Caddesi will become here. This is that area. Also the situation when Henri Prost arrived, more or less. Okay. For the planning history of Istanbul, maybe to remember Helmut von Moltke, who arrived here in 1838 and made the first cartography of the Ottoman city, Ottoman capital, and proposed some major boulevards. But they were not really realized in the 19th century. As you see, this is the most iconic representation of the master plan of Henri Prost. You can see very clearly the similarities to the plan of Helmut von Moltke. So if we confine us, he also did the planning for the Asian side, but if we just confine us to the European side, we see that the major concept was to create three major public areas in the city, which are dominated by a green tissue. The first one of them is the archaeological park, which comprises the area of the Ottoman and the former Roman palace and the hippodrome and so on area. So it should be an area of not development, but excavations, archaeological excavations and renovations of Byzantine and Ottoman in situ monuments, and kind of creating this park is the very first area, because as he was also very had a very good classical humanistic education, so he was so the monuments played a very important role. We also owe, for instance, Henri Prost this Code 30 rule that no building on the historical peninsula can create a new skyline that disturbs the skyline of the Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman monuments. Indeed, in 19th century, because they built already several buildings in the historical peninsula that were competing with the Ottoman mosques and the Roman Byzantine buildings. But that was kind of banned with his plan. The second is here, what is today the Vatan Boulevard. That area should be a big, let's say, park. Byzantine and Ottoman buildings in that area should be preserved and should be musealized, but also like a big Olympic park should be placed into this park. So this is the park number one. Has never been realized. Also on this representation we see it rather vaguely indicated. It is not really well worked out and has been never realized. On the other hand, the park number two, the northern park, the Machka Park, has been become, although we were already in the years of the Second World War, during the war, already the first investments and detailed plans were made, and an investment plan was made, and so this park was realized. It is the Machka Park, the park number two. So if you look at the entire plan of Henri Prost from the point of view of its realization, from the point of view the way the political elites of the Republican People's Party, the way the Kemalists have implemented these ideas, you will see a city emerged around Greater Taksim. So with Taksim, I do not only mean the Taksim Square, I mean the whole urban ensemble that comprises of the new modern neighborhoods. So in the 20th century neighborhoods of Cihangir, the neighborhood I just shown you before, this around the Gümüşsuyu and the Mete streets, this whole big island, and the neighborhood of Talimhane. So these three neighborhoods are very important that surround the square. The promenade and the Machka Valley Park and the neighborhoods that do surround the Machka Park Valley, okay, which are also being modernized. If you just read Orhan Pamuk's childhood memoirs, the book Istanbul, so there you will see how all these old konaks are pulled down one by one or being fire sanitated one by one and being replaced by these new modern apartment buildings. Okay, so this greater, what I call the greater Taksim is indeed, so this whole planned 19th century areas being now transformed into apartment housing areas, the whole Machka Park area, the promenade, the Taksim Square, and the three neighborhoods surrounding the Taksim Square. All of that is indeed where the city's development takes place. Whereas the city is shrinking, that's also interesting. So in those years, Istanbul is a shrinking city. But in a shrinking city now, this center emerges, and into this center, we see a lot of public and private investments flow in. So the 30s, 40s, 50s city. So for these 30 years, the new Republican center of Istanbul emerges in this space between Cihangir and Machka, let's say. Cihangir till Machka, a new Istanbul emerges. The new Republican Istanbul emerges. And yeah, here a kind of a view, an aerial view of that space. Okay, the construction of the Talimhane area. So Henri Prost's major achievement is, of course, now creating a symbolic center for this whole greater Taksim, which is the Taksim Square per se. And the Taksim Square per se is well achieved through the demolition of the stables and opening up the area between the monument all the way to the site of the former cemetery. So this is the area where in future these two buildings will be demolished and the Atatürk Cultural Center, the opera, will be placed in. So you see here, yeah, before the square is established, the stables have been just demolished and the barracks are still there. And from a different angle, the same Talimhane is already developed as a modern quarter, an aerial view. So the area now from the north, from the Grand Rue de Pancade, which is now which is already the Boulevard of the Republic. You see the radio house is established. It's a very important building. So indeed, 4 buildings of the park plan are implemented quite quickly. I will show you maybe a picture of that. Is it this? Let me see. Is it? No, it's not that one. Yeah, this one. The radio house, which is of course important because through the radio the nation state transmits its voice, is very important. Indeed, the government in Ankara is far away, but it is present through the radio, so therefore the radio house is important. This is the, as they would call it, the palace for sports and exhibitions, this building, the open-air theater, and the Inönü Stadium, which is now, which takes place through a redevelopment of the stables in Dolmabahce. Okay, these 4 buildings are all built during already during the war years. So these are the buildings with priority. So public investments would take place in this area. An aerial picture. Taksim itself was indeed planned by Henri Prost in a different way. So now this is the Taksim Promenade, which is the part today. It was supposed to be built up area. Only the central part of it was planned as a green corridor, but it was a kind of a big, well, archway. So there's a building for the Republican People's Party here, a building for the Red Crescent here. Also in a different, let's say, this is the back part. Here we have the city casino, İstanbul Şehir Gazinosu, Quite nice indeed. Modernist building was built there, but again, this is a different way of designing the buildings at the promenade. But opposite where today we have the Marmara Hotel, there should be again other governmental buildings. This entire block at the Opera should again be a very monumental state place. So the Taksim Square should indeed be something very similar. I don't know if you just think of Karl-Marx-Straße in Berlin and so on, something similar, that fashion you have to imagine. But this was not the priority, so the money was lacked. They couldn't build this. So what in reality was built at Taksim is just this. So only that much was implemented. So kind of a very simple functionalist and indeed quite nice ramp that would make the access to the Gezi area. But here, something that doesn't exist today would represent all of that planning I was showing before. It is simply, you see it from a different angle. Here you can see it much better, yeah. Okay, this is a big pedestal, like 7 meters in height, and on top of this, there should be placed a statue, which would show Mr. İnönü, who is the follower of Atatürk, who's also of military origin, who was the second president of the Ottoman Empire, of the Turkish Republic. Good lapses. And he was shown indeed on horseback, just the very same way the Roman emperors like Hadrian and so were shown. So you can imagine now, so this is placed much higher. So the new extended Taksim Square is not anymore Atatürk Square, but is now İnönü Square. Also, if you imagine that İnönü was called the national chef, and the whole state system in late 1930s was resembling more and more Italy and Germany, taking up more and more ideas of a corporate state system as in Italy and Germany. The whole nation organized in a very military way. So this whole square was indeed prepared for big ceremonies where this militarized nation organized in different departments, sections, the children, the youth, the housewives, the intellectuals, the handworkers, the farmers, and the soldiers, and so on, all sections of the society, opposing the nomenclatura of the People's Republican Party, which was placed in big stands in front of national chef's statue. You can just imagine this very corporatist, totalitarian type of appearance of a nation as an army here. But this way, Taksim Square was never used. It has never been really a place like that. After the Second World War, Turkey felt threatened by Soviet Russia, got closer to the Western Alliance, became a NATO member, and so on. So this rather totalitarian, say, phase of the in between the two world war republic disappeared. It was softened very soon. Parties were allowed, elections, democracy was introduced, and so on in a way. So they also would remove that pedestal from here. They would put it onto the other part onto the other side of the Maçka Park, where Mr. İnönü would get a villa for himself. So that pedestal with the statue is there, just in front of Mr. İnönü's own villa. So you can sit on his terrace and kind of enjoy his own statue from the back at a 5 o'clock tea ceremony. Yeah. So it is not here anymore. But of course, I guess the state would never really forget and forgive this. I guess this is another major, say, topics. I will get to that of today's program being realized at Taksim Square. Okay, this is the casino. The back, the trees are just implemented. So the trees are indeed, you may think, this was kind of an interim use, and it's Zwischennutzung in German. So it is until We come back later just in order not to let the space being empty like that. We squat the space with the trees. That was possibly the idea there before, but they could never return back, and so the park was developed. Okay, the valley. These are, this is one of the drawings we have from Henri Prost. We see here, in a stadium here. 3 of the barracks buildings, the Taşkışla Barracks, the Gümüşsuyu Barracks, and the Maçka Barracks here, they were given to the Technical University. And military has reused now the Harbiye Barracks as a cultural compound. So 4 barracks got this cultural function. And now in the radio house, here we have the palace for sports and exhibitions, the open air theater, and the stadium, and the radio house, the realized ones. So with all of that, now we see here the new urban ensemble. This is now a Republican Külliye. And now, if you look, in particular with the construction of the inner stadium and the peripheral roads to the inner stadium, the Dolmabahçe ensemble is demolished. So here in this part, let's say that way, the Republican center of the city indeed is placed on that axis which used to be in the 19th century the capital axis. So in the 19th century the state was present at the Bosphorus axis. So the Republican axis has indeed its very focal point here at Taksim Square and the promenade. And of course the promenade does create a pedestrian link and a green space link between the square and the valley, but the valley extends down to the waterfront and kind of crushes, demolishes the Dolmabahçe Square. And I think this is the not necessarily unintended impact of this project. So the Republican vision, the Republican project of modernization does make the Ottoman project of modernization unreadable. Today we don't see it anymore. This is, I think, I am absolutely convinced it is not an unintended thing. Because, I mean, if you look and read the entire Republican project, Republican project starts the history of modernization with itself. I mean, any simple school book here and abroad, in any Western country, modernization does start with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. He kind of liberates the woman and does this and so on. So before Atatürk, the entire country was sunken into the darkness of the Middle Ages. Anything in the 19th century was nothing but Middle Ages. It is the second wave of, let's say, enlightened despotism, if I use this terminology of political science. But the interesting point is, this second wave of enlightened despotism, for the sake of modernism, does totally disregard the first wave, does so as if it did not exist. And the best way to prove this claim is making built traces of that first wave simply invisible. If you crush this Ottoman ensemble, the urban ensemble, this urban külliye, so, and make out of the Dolmabahçe Palace just a touristic object, because if you crush that space, if you kind of demolish at least, so the boathouse, the gas factory, the theater, and the stables are demolished. The square itself is diminished into a traffic circulation area and parking plot. So the ensemble character of that is totally gone. As a result, you can't read it anymore. Today, for us, Dolmabahçe is just the name of a palace. We may visit or not visit it. I guess most of you haven't even visited it. We regard it as a kitsch and so on. So it is not anymore part of our consciousness is not anymore the part of our consciousness, the way we conceive the city. So if we talk about the city, we don't talk at all. There is no chapter of the modernization in 19th century Ottoman capital. This chapter doesn't exist at all. We have the 16th century Sinan's time, and then we jump to, I don't know if we are interested in the global age, so we just go and have a look at Central, or we go to Levant. So anything in between is a big gap, is a black hole. It simply doesn't exist. Okay? And this is mainly due to this demolition of that space. I think this is a well-learned lesson by AKP. So that's another very important psychological motif. So whatever you build, the way you kind of put your stamp on public space, the way you create your own ensemble, your own külliye at some place, that is what the future generations will read. So the project, the total Taksim project, which does comprise of Tarlabaşı and now the redevelopment of the barracks, the new AKM, the designing of the square itself, the tunnel and so on. This is now the AKP postmodern ensemble. Okay? This is now also an ensemble that does kind of crush the Republican concept. Okay? I think this way we have to understand it. Because on Taksim there were many other forces that have been changing the square since then. I'm going to highlight a few of them briefly, and we'll get to today. But if we, let's say, look at the entire history of the agents that do kind of intervene in terms of centrality into this built-up area of Istanbul. So we see the 19th century had a very clear top-down approach. 1930s, 40s Republican planning had a very clear top-down approach. The 50s interventions by Prime Minister Menderes, the 1980s interventions by Prime Minister Özal and his mayor Dalan possibly lacked that type of a holistic approach. I'm going to show a little bit of their approach as well in a few minutes. And then, so I think in the whole period between 1950s and 90s, a lot of bottom-up developments took place and shaped Taksim Square, like many other parts of Istanbul as well. In Erdogan, I see two things being put together. Erdogan does have, again, this very top-down approach, the way 19th century and the way 1930s do behave, but he is well aware this is not at all anymore in the planning culture and in the political culture of today. It is not at all possible to do it this way. Today's society is a different society. Today's whole planning culture is a different planning culture. Today's political culture is a different one. So you can't do it anymore like Henri Prost and his mayor, not elected, appointed mayor, Lütfü Kırdar, and Lütfü Kırdar's prime minister and President İnönü did it in 1940s. This way, it can't be done today anymore. But he behaves, de facto he behaves this way, but he takes up many, let's say, features of the implementing culture. So there's a one thing we call the planning culture, but there's also the implementing culture. And the implementing culture is the implementing culture of Menderes in 1950s and Dalan in 1980s. So this is a kind of a mixture. So using the implementing culture, ad hoc and powerful implementing culture of the liberalisms of 50s and 80s is the tool he uses to implement a plan very much in the manner of 19th century, 1930s. So it is a very interesting, I think, fusion we see today. Okay, this is kind of a sketch that we have from Henri Prost. This part is the big platform which has been later redeveloped as the Hilton Hotel. With the development of the Hilton Hotel in 1950s under Menderes, with the redevelopment of the City Casino here as the today's Ceylan Interconti Hotel, originally it was a Sheraton Hotel. So with this hotel, and with this hotel, later with the redevelopment of the tennis club here, this is a tennis club, these are tennis courts, but it was a quite open public space. It was not really a posh, exclusive place. It was kind of everybody could get in. It was a very Republican, let's say, concept of, again, tennis. Redevelopment of this as the Hyatt Regency. There was a small hospital here. The hospital here redeveloped as the Taksim residences. So Ceylan Interconti, Hyatt Regency, Taksim residences, and Hilton. So that whole hotel development here has cut already in 1950s, but very strongly in the 1990s with the development of this part as well. The promenade and Taksim Square from the Machka Park. So it's indeed the unified flowing green space and public space that starts at let's say Istiklal Street and goes all the way to Machka. That is indeed, that does not exist anymore. So this part has been already cut. So this is indeed mainly in 1950s and 1990s neoliberal policies have kind of privatized space. This is what I was calling this hardcore implementing culture without much planning of these periods. Also, if we look at some other realizations of the same, this is kind of the planning of 40s, how the Cumhuriyet Caddesi should look like. So this is Divan Hotel and the following office buildings here. You see these nice arcades as a pedestrian area. There's the car, but car is also kind of part of this whole. So what we see here is kind of, what you see is the flaneurship as here, simply dominating the scene. The car is there, but it's rather an accessoire. But if you see how it has been realized, but if you just zoom a little bit into the interior, there are not yet many cars, but you see the arcades are cut so that the cars can drive in between. So it is already the implementation in 1950s of that 1940s plan. So here the implementation does bring in very strongly the element of the car. So after the Second World War, we will see a car-compatible sanitation, transformation of the city will become very important. Car will become, or any vehicles on 4 rubber wheels will become the major, let's say, means of transportation in the city. Okay. Again, a little bit back to the 40s concept of the public space. This is the City Casino on the spot of the today's Ceylan Interconti. Very nice modern building. It's a pity it was demolished, I guess. So these are, you can't even see if it's a render, is a photo. So they are quite mixed. This is, I think, a very illuminating photo. So this is like 40s, 50s. The way the promenade is used, the Gezi Park is used, you see the public. So this is yet the pre-migration Istanbul. Istanbul elites, when a city is like a million, the city has 1 million inhabitants, not yet a target of mass migration from Anatolia. So we don't yet have this unpleasant encounter with the migrant population in public space, as it would become quite obvious in mid-1960s already. So in mid-1960s, you would feel the pressure of the migrant population in public space, because lots of the one-family houses in this geography I was mentioning, Cihangir till Machka geography, many indeed almost all one-family houses would be demolished, would be replaced by new cheap apartment houses. In all of these houses you would have the concierge families in substandard living circumstances. The only way they would get out the only way for them to get some fresh air and light and sun is indeed getting out and getting into this public space. And I think this is now the beginning of a very major confrontation in public space. So these elites would withdraw themselves from public space. They would limit their access to public space, indeed, to the verandas and gardens, platforms of the Hilton Hotel. That's why the Hilton Hotel privatization has never been opposed in 1950s. Like today, cutting of the 3 trees at Gezi Park mobilizes the whole society today. The most important social movement we have been witnessing in the history of the city has been due to that. But when they built the entire Hilton Hotel, nothing of the like happened. Only Mr. Aron Angel, who's the vice of Henri Prost, has made some bureaucratic opposition, and then he resigned, and that was all. But for the middle class, I think it was important to get the chance to have access to that green space now from a terrace. You don't anymore have to go into that green space because the green space is already squatted now by the migrant population. So you just stay on Hilton Terrace and you enjoy the green with your eyes, not anymore with your feet. That's a major paradigm change, which was only overcome in the last 10 years. Maybe the grandchildren of that population, which withdrew in the 1950s from public space, has been acquiring a new culture of readopting the green space in the last 10 years. Machka Park has been used by a new, say, mixture of a population. I would call it the new emerging middle class convention of Istanbul. The old and new middle class, intergeneration, would meet in public space. Machka Park is I think, is a good place to observe it. Taksim is different, Taksim Gezi, as Taksim has lost its quality altogether during the 80s and 90s. It is not anymore a place where you would like to be. It is not a place where you spend your time. Where you never calm down, and it is because Taksim Square has been somewhat designed as a traffic hub. It is a starting point for city buses, and it used to be also a starting point for dolmushes. That means, so you would just exchange your vehicle. It's a busy place. Taksim can only be port to other places, or Taksim is just a place where you just exchange your vehicle. That means it's a place where you hastily go over it. Okay, it's a very dynamic space, but it has not anymore to come. So as a result, the adjacent Gezi, the promenade, also cuts from its background from the Machka Park without having a link to the Machka Park, but now being an attachment, being reduced to an attachment of the Taksim Park, has been quite degraded. It's not being used, so it has not taken part in the development of Machka Park's social new mix, okay, in the last years. So this is also another thing we have to keep bear in mind. But I think the whole movement, the Taksim platform movement, as it appeared 1.5 years ago, has now been actively claiming this space in the name of the grandchildren of the people we see on this picture. That's, I think, another major issue we should bear in mind. Okay. The Atatürk Cultural Center, a few words about it. It has been first designed by French architect Perret in 1930s, but was the construction did not begin until 1946. His plans were slightly changed and adapted by Rükneddin Güney, but it was still this very monumental Republican type of structure that would rather fit the state's vision of the old Inonu regime between the two world wars. And in the year 1953, they still had not commenced much. They just had got stuck midway in constructing the building. So as a result, 1953, that was stopped by the central government. Mr. Hayati Tabanlıoğlu, with a lot of experience with cultural buildings, theaters, music halls in post-war Germany, who also made his doctorate on that, his PhD. He came back to Turkey and he was appointed the chief architect for this project. It would become his big life project. But in the name of the Ankara Ministry of Public Works, he built up the office of the ministry in Istanbul, and he worked for almost like 20 years. And he mainly changed the whole concept, and he made out of this building a typical post-war modernist building. I think his emphasis is quite strongly in the idea that this big transparent facade should take up the square. So he designed the building as an extension of the square. Unfortunately, we were never able to experience that until 2007, until when the biennial took place, to make us aware of it. Because business as usual in Atatürk Cultural Center was, you would buy a ticket to see a performance, opera, theater, ballet, or concert. Whenever the show is finished, you're kicked off, and they just shut down the doors. So the security of the house is just very happy being there alone. So they don't want to have the public. But it is called a cultural center. But the cultural center, as we understand today, is of course something that lives 24 hours. If the building can be used as a 24-hour building, I think it will also have a good impact on the square itself to kind of calm down the square and extend the square as a building, like an indoor public space. But that has been quite the negotiation in during the last 7-8 years. Beforehand, the Istanbul Cultural Center of Europe. Unfortunately, a decision was made finally to rather just retrofit it and go on using it the way it was used all the time, as a performance hall, but not as a cultural center in the real sense of the word. Okay, a few more ideas. So this is, here you see it, Atatürk Cultural Center, still after 7 years of construction, not finished, and then taken up by Hayat Tabanlıoğlu. So this is the old Rükneddin Güney building. There was a very good exhibition in SALT, which was on here until January. If you were here in the last autumn, you may have seen it. It was quite a good exhibition. Yeah. Okay, this is now, here we see how that Republican concept crushed the Ottoman külliye. So the boathouse is not here, the annexes of the mosque are not here, the theater is not here, the stables are not here, the square is invisible. So we just see as a touristic highlight an isolated building, the palace itself. So which is indeed a kitsch. So there's really no need anymore to go and visit it. So we don't have anymore that whole thing. Okay, a few more ideas. Here in 1960, we begin with the history of the coup d'etats. So the introduction of the multi-party system in Turkey is also the introduction of a period where the state founding party, Republican People's Party, never ever is able to win any election. So the military gets in that period more and more powerful and makes coups thrice, 1960, 71 and 80, a kind of what they call a postmodern coup, 1997, and like 3 attempts of a coup in the last 10 years, failed coups, and responsibles are today in jail. So this is now the whole, let's say, period of a democracy under arms that was quite visible also again at Taksim Square. The bayonet was there until 1980. But parallel to that, so we have between, let's say, 45 and, let's say, 2008, so we have this very interesting dual system in Istanbul and in Turkey. So we have the military kind of in the background, exercising quite strong power on the political agenda. But the transformation of the public space, the transformation of the cityscape of Istanbul, is now taking place under a different political culture, under Menderes and Dalan, and later Erdogan. So that culture is very strongly dominated by the element car. Okay. So if you've read again Orhan Pamuk's childhood memoirs, you are well aware of his mother and aunt. So this the Machka elite, which just makes their excursions by car to the Bosphorus, which is the space, the urban space of these fallen aristocrats. They just go and visit these old ladies in their palaces, poor Ottoman aristocrats who can't even heat their villas. They have to burn their oil paintings and furnitures and carpets in order to be able to heat even a small room of the old palace. That's, I mean, the situation we have. So, but the new elite is the elite with the car. So indeed, the implementation of the unrepressed plan in 50s is indeed nothing but the implementation with a whole set of express roads. And this is indeed, today's tunnel at Taksim Square is indeed just to be understood within this very culture of, say, car-driven transformation of the city space. Okay? Just an example here, Aksaray. I will just give you one example. There are dozens of examples in Istanbul. Aksaray, until mid-19th century, the city of the ancien regime of Istanbul, this is the real old city, the old Mahalle system. I guess this cross is a very old leftover of the Roman road system. Somewhat a cross is still there. And mid-19th century planning, after a fire devastation, kind of creates the grid here, but still in a very, let's say, modest scale. 1950s intervention under Menderes creates a totally new urban scale, mainly for the car. During this transformation, also the streetcar is abundant. First, until 1957, in Islam we had the tram, with a huge tram network, several hundred kilometers tram network. So while they extended these roads, they demolished all the tracks, the rails for the tram, and they made the city a city of these express roads. They're not highways, but they are like big express roads, and indeed they just link the newly emerging centers in the South Attica and in the North Levant, and with the Taksim. So the new geography of the Istanbul urban elites to emerge. And so you see the historical peninsula is nothing but like a battleground. You just drive over it, okay? Because historical peninsula has been abandoned by capital already in the mid-19th century. So with the withdrawal of capital from the historical peninsula continues in Republican period. Why is Taksim the center of the Republican planning? Because the, let's say, the spontaneous movement of the Republican elites is towards the north. They just come and, so they despise the South. They don't go anymore to the South. And Democratic Party in the 50s would use this in a very democratic, in a very interesting way. They would say, look, the Republicans didn't make any investments here in this space, so now we are investing. So the public is again there, the state is there, the state gives you the streets, but indeed these are streets which can only be used by the car owners, and this is indeed their network, the car owners network. And I think the car ownership here in the historical peninsula was very, very low. It was kind of the lower middle classes area. So public investment in the historical peninsula would possibly meant not big car infrastructure, but something else. Okay? Maybe more social infrastructure would be much more important there. But let's again go back to Aksaray cross. So this follows now in the 70s, and today, this is today how it looks. Within less than 100 years, this would become this. Okay. So another chapter and idea is the migration we have already mentioned. Industrialization of Istanbul after the Second World War brings a lot of migrant population to the city, which are politically very active, socially very present, and as a result, in 1970s, a big, let's say, social movement from the death comes and conquers the Taksim Square. So in 70s, Taksim Square becomes the square for big mass rallies of the social movements. Republican People's Party itself, makes a very interesting U-turn and calls itself social democratic. So that's kind of a self-adopted, self-assigned attribute, a party which doesn't come at all from working class movement, but from bureaucratic and military elites tradition, kind of claims to be that, rather in order to prevent that type of a real left movement to emerge, I would say. But that's important because the way the social movements claim Taksim Square in 1970s creates a very strong impact. Today, the major perception of Taksim Square is a square of social movements, like we have been witnessing in the last 12 days. And the 1977 May Day becomes a very disastrous day. There is kind of there's a shooting takes place, not on the mass, but like panic grows and people just run out of the space at Kazancı street. Like people, it's like a funnel, and people just crush each other, and almost 40 people died there. So it was the big say disaster in Istanbul's history. And from then on, due to a argumentation, we can't provide for security for such a big mass gathering on the square. Sorry, we can't allow anymore the May Day on Taksim Square. So this was like until 3-4 years ago. For 30 years, Taksim Square was closed to May Day demonstrations. And that has been now a very major, let's say, struggle in the city. Taksim City has become very disputed throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And its very first democratizing period of government, AKP has been the first government in 30 years that has allowed the May Day again being celebrated on Taksim Square. But now this is my claim, this is my thesis. The very major idea behind the nowadays, the actual planning behind the Taksim Square project, I'll just show you now one plan of it, okay, here, is, if you look at it, I think I can read it very easily, making it physically impossible anymore, the celebration of the May Day at Taksim. Throughout the last 30 years, the Ancien Republic, the old republic, the Kemalist Republic, was trying to prevent the May Day with police barricades and tear gas and so on. So every year at May Day we had this big theater being played there. But if you look here, you can see it very clearly. So in order to access this big mass to Taksim Square, you need a big corridor to access. So this is obviously corridor, the Grand Rue from north, from Şişli, and from south to Tarlabaşı. But if you come this way, if you follow this road, in order to be able to access Taksim, whenever you arrive here, you have to you dive into the tunnel without accessing the Taksim Square. You just go out. The alternative way would be via the promenade, and that's not possible either, because when you build it up here, you have here another obstacle, a physical obstacle. So this is indeed one of the major ideas why something has to be built here. I think this was a major mistake of the whole movement, concentrating on one of the possible functions of the building, a shopping mall. I guess they would have loved to build a shopping mall here, but this is not necessarily the very essential point. Building something is very important, and now, yesterday, Prime Erdogan made a statement, and he was thinking, now our friends are examining if it's possible that we just develop this part, the very original Taksim Gardens, as a city museum. So if instead of rebuilding the barracks here, if you just build here a museum, the same, the function, this physical barricade is done again. So he thinks that this way he can cheat the movement. Okay, I will leave you this larger part of the park, and I will just make here a museum with a big green courtyard inside. We'll just make a kind of a small museum here, but please let us do it. So let us that be the consensus. But if he just builds that, I think then the major, let's say, impact of the project is indeed done. So you don't need more than that. So now what they're examining is if this is, let's say, in terms of, so what they build is indeed military architecture. It's absolutely military architecture. And this is agenda of not AKP. This is the agenda of the ancient state. So this way, so AKP finds just a more elaborate solution to a 30 years old problem. Okay. Maybe I will stop just here and don't tell much more.
Is that the
Yeah, okay, I stop here, and if you have any questions, I'll just highlight the questions. Okay. Maybe we should give some, please, we're recording, so please do use the microphones.
Yeah, I didn't know we were recording, so I'm not going to mention my name. The question is going to be, is that the only tunnel that's currently being planned, or are there any other tunnels planned?
Yeah, okay. So in the original plan, indeed there are, there's another tunnel that goes down here in Gümüşsuyu and comes out in Mete Caddesi. Another tunnel that comes out of the Sıra Serviler as well. And making a big rotunda underneath the whole Taksim Square. Such a setup you can see, for instance, in Topkapı, just outside the city walls, or you can see it in Çağlayan. Çağlayan is, I think, even a much better example, because these are also pedestrianized squares with a highway cross, a highway roundabout underground, which is kind of just covered by a concrete plate on top. That's the concept. So in order to see what the Istanbul plan, what the Taksim plan indeed is, to see that, you just go to these areas, and you will see this huge Topkapı Park is absolutely empty. It's one of the largest pedestrian areas in Istanbul. It can't be used by pedestrians because you don't have access from the neighborhoods. It can't be used. It's very strange. Just go there. It's huge, pleasant park there, and nobody using it. The same with the Çağlayan thing. So it is. So this pedestrianization concept is indeed getting the people away from it. But the board did not allow these other three entries into the Taksim area being built. But after now, so 12 days ago, all the paravans were demolished, so we could go and see the construction site, and you can obviously see, so illegally they built the entry to the underground of Taksim Square, although it has not been allowed. So indeed, no matter if it will be allowed or not, they are going to build this highway roundabout underneath in the entire Taksim, because only if you build also Mete Caddesi and Gümüşsuyu and Sıra Serviler, also with such car tunnels, then you completely isolate the square. So this the complete military architecture is only achieved then, and I think they will just push with this. And unfortunately now, and this is the big mistake I think people did. So as we're collecting the signatures, people wanted to make sure that the signatures are not against the car tunnels, but only against the cutting of the trees. And the government knows that very well. Anything which what is done for the car driver, is always accepted. People never question it. People never are critical about any kind of investments for car mobility. But they are obviously very sensitive about protecting the green. So let's say the car tunnel was, in that sense, for the government, the strong part of the project. And the redevelopment of the park was the weak part. So they left it to the end. Okay? And of course, besides being the whole thing a military defense architecture, it also fits another thing. The concept of public space has changed. By the way. So you are only a pedestrian where you have to be, where you stage yourself. You just walk around and see who you are. But you don't really walk just for the sake of walking. You get until that point with the car and then leave your car and just show it yourself. Okay? That's kind of a new type of meaning also public space acquires. In this sense, we also have to understand that Erdogan wants to make visible the new middle class, which does own the cars, because the post-migration urban society in Istanbul is only visible through the poor male population. So they are just visible as football fans, as friends of a person who is leaving for his military service. You possibly have seen those ceremonies to say farewell to a freshman soldier, or at these Bayram days when just big groups of young men go to brothels at Karaköy. They just pass through Istiklal and so on, or at New Year's Eve again. So this male population from the peripheral areas of Istanbul, they are the face of that post-migration society in the very city center, because Taksim and Istiklal, this is the showcase of Istanbul, and that population is here visible only with these people. And of course, every time they appear here in public space, they discredit the people whom Erdogan calls the Negroes. They say we are still regarded Negroes. They still don't believe we are cultivated people. We have let's say, a sense for literature and music and culture and this and that. But every time we appear, you treat us like Negroes. So the way to get away from the stigma is to make the other face of the post-migration society appear. The middle-class family with its children, with the car. They do already own cars. So as the middle-class conservative family. But of course, the whole face of this part of the city is quite well, let's say, branded with youth consuming cheap alcohol in public space. And that's, in their very conservative way of thinking about the space, is a big clash. So there is, I think, on both sides, I guess there is a lack of understanding of the public space as everyone's space, as a shared space. So everybody thinks of the public space as exclusive for itself. So this whole project also tries to create a new exclusivity, and the car infrastructure is a major tool to create this new exclusivity. Okay? So in this way, I think we have to understand the tunnel projects as well, besides being a military project as well. And of course, the military component of the car infrastructure does also excludes the political body. So the whole social movement is part of it. So in the last revolts we witnessed in the last 12 years and 12 days and still witnessing, indeed we see the coalition, in a way, a vague coalition of the political movements on the one hand side and the lifestyle, say, party. So they are both in a very, let's say, fluid way intermingling with each other, but you would still see in the party, you would see the lifestyle party, and in the square you would find more the political segment of it, but in somewhat in a coalition with each other in this whole solidarity platform. And I think, and both are indeed targeted to be excluded from this new public space. And the whole car infrastructure is I think, the best way to build it. So, any other questions?
Do we also have this kind of double failure, perhaps, of AKP in the sense that A is the party in power for the last 10 years has failed to produce any kind of symbolic architecture in the city.
Yep.
That is, they did the Sütlice conversion, but that's really not symbolic architecture of power of any sort. There's the miniature, which is also not taken very seriously, or the Conquest Museum, or things of that sort. And that's kind of a general cultural failure of the AKP project, in the sense that there was not a kind of a genuine production of a cultural expression of the party in power. That is, not in poetry, not in film, certainly not in contemporary art. Not in any form of institutional cultural expression that we know. And this would have been, or maybe will be, perhaps the first expression in which it's based on failure, because it's a representation of the representative of the early 19th century modernization model. I mean, that's one part of my curiosity, as if you uncouple it from the diving tunnels, and then and then the second part of this is that the square and all the architecture abutting it, all the from AKM and etc. is from the either early modern, as you say, the 40s, or the later international modern of the 60s and the early 70s. These are at the same time civic projects of a sort. I mean, they're exclusivist in particular ways, but they're also civic projects fully funded by the state, by the government. Yeah. Like AKM, and it had this completely fluid relationship to the facade. Before that relationship was broken or taken away by taking the ticket booths outside and all of those things, putting the stupid trees in front of it, so that there was no, all the visual access to the AKM was cut. And in that way, what is being proposed in terms of the new artillery, barracks, as a public-private function building, is not actually a civic project in the modernist sense. It's a different sort of project, which creates as you say, a kind of a smooth space, between the inside and the outside. It's also, you can't go in to pee, because you have to go through the X-ray machine, and I mean there's going to be whole sets of impediments. It's not civic in that way that it's a modernist project. Although it has a modernist invention, it's not a modernist project because it doesn't produce new forms of civic space.
I fully agree. Yes, and indeed, of course. The only say point for the whole project is, of course, Taksim has to change. I mean, there are many reasons for why Taksim has to change. I mean, we don't live in the social reality of 1930s. We don't live in the Kemalist regime. We don't live, I mean, in those years we just had like 25% of Turkey being urbanized. Today we have 80% urbanized. So we live in a post-migration society. We live in the third generation of the post-migration society. And we live in the political and social reality of that society, of course. And during all these big societal changes took place, in Taksim there were only very ad hoc interventions. And indeed, the only, maybe I can also show it, there was just one project competition for a project, which was won by Vedat Dalakay. This was also a very, let's say, exclusive modernist project, which could not also be implemented. So that was already an old-fashioned project, which couldn't be implemented that way. So there is for sure that you have to look at the reality of Taksim from the diversity point of view of today's society, and indeed both the social and political reality of the movement that occupies today Taksim and Gezi does well represent this majority. It indeed also does represent also the social basis of the AKP as well. So if only AKP were able to read this movement, and if it only were able to link in a, let's say, more courageous way with people of culture in architecture and in other disciplines, AKP could have been, well, the agent of building up the new Turkey, making it also visible in public space, could kind of smoothly take up the idea of the public in the modernist movements and take it to the next level, let's say, in a very inclusive way. AKP could have been the political agent with that capacity, but in the after the third period of the election, they totally failed, also in political sense. And unfortunately, when I say, I mean, despite of all claims, on the other hand, unfortunately, and particularly on the side of the Prime Minister, there's absolutely no understanding, I mean, of this. The party, in its broader network, does still, I believe, has this capacity to be more inclusive, to be more open. First, one thing that just comes to my mind is Emre Arulat, for instance, architect, is building that Sancaklar Mosque in Küçükçekmece, which is the very first mosque of not only the Turkish history without a dome. It rather does resemble, let's say, a bathhouse of the Swiss architect Zumthor, let's say. So it's a cave without a dome and so on. So this is absolutely provocative and shocking in, say, vis-a-vis the mindset of the traditionalist Muslim. And that mosque was now possible. There's at least some new Muslim bourgeois who can, say, be a sponsor, and within also the Diyanet and also political circles, that was discussed and it was accepted. But it is still far in the periphery, in an area like Küçükçekmece. So being so courageous, coming with such an idea to place Taksim and maybe rediscuss the whole idea of the publicness of Taksim. So bringing, instead of making like a Çamlıca project and making like big bad fake of a Sinan's piece there, but kind of making a by far much more inclusive discussion table for Taksim, and making a place for both for the new middle class and old middle class, and the young population and the political, let's say, demonstrators and so on. So. Rather putting the question, how can we be inclusive, instead of saying, how can we be exclusive just for ourselves? So if you just put the question the other way, I think the solutions can be found. And of course, Istanbul of today does have a large potential to answer this question in a very creative way. We know it. But, yeah. Okay. So, if there are no more questions, I thank you all for joining us today.